Hey there, everybody. It's Mike Yao again with Savage Kingdoms role-playing game and FireNet Productions. My little intro, which is what I usually do. So this is a video about, which was promised in the last video, the update video I did, 4 or 5 days ago. I thought I would do a series of videos based on the different cultures and kingdoms and realms of the western continent of the Savage Kingdom's known world. The western continent is known as Astagonia to wide explorers, but to the common person, they're not really aware of a continent. They may not even know what the term means, particularly a more rural, grounded commoner. They have much more pressing local concerns, such as survival and surviving the winter and brigand attacks and over-taxation and monster attacks, even that sort of thing. So yeah, a little side note there. Astagonia is the name of the Western continent, as some of you already know, but most people don't really care that there is a greater world beyond their world, which extends to the nearest mountain range or the nearest river, perhaps even larger. So today I'm going to start with Aradorn. I'm going to go in alphabetical order. So in the core rulebook on page 22, actually technically page 21, is character races, chapter 6, or section 6 of the character creation chapter, technically. Page 21 of the hardcover. I think it's page 22 in the PDF, the digital version. So on page 22 of the hardcover, which I'm referencing right now, to me it's a lot easier to deal with. I'm a hard copy person anyway. Like good old-fashioned books, God forbid. There is a table 2.2 is a master list of playable races. So there's 13, I believe, or is there 12? Let's see. Let's count them real quick. 13. There's 13 playable human cultures in the Savage Kingdoms 3rd edition game, at least the Western cultures, the ones that are listed in the core rulebook. The Savage East, the second book, the expansion book, will be out later, covering the different playable human cultures and other non-human races of Hassan and Amanju and Mezca and Ragnagard. Those are the other continents. Well, 2 of them are actual continents, and the other 2 are isle continents. So this one, we're going to start with Aradorn, and let's just go right ahead. I think it's quite enough setup here at 2 minutes and 42 seconds. All right, Aradorn. On table 2.2, it says Aradorn. The brief description of Aradorn is an agrarian horse-based people known for their honor and chivalry. It's just one line. I just wanted to put one line there, just a basic description. So people looking to decide what character they want to play, it's just a quick line going, agrarian horse-based people known for their honor and chivalry. Cool. Sounds like a little bit like maybe kind of a night sort of setting, knightly sort of setup. And they would be correct. Of course, that's a very generalistic statement, but in general, hence the term, they would be correct. So, Aradorn was founded in, if you go to the beginning of the core rulebook, Aradorn was founded, the realm was founded, I just had the page open and I lost it, in the year 3, stalling, I lost the page, bad me. Well, strangely enough, in the year 1 AA, which means Age of Aradorn. So that's when their calendar begins, is 1 AA, and that was 256 years ago. So you will find this on page 13 in the hardcover, 14 in the digital, I believe. That's the Savage Kingdoms timeline. It's section 4, first part of the book. Lots of lovely lore there if you haven't had a chance to read. I know some people just get books and they kind of go right to the rules and they skip all the, to me, the far more interesting stuff, which is the history and the lore. So if you've skipped some of that or really haven't connected with it deeply, I advise you to go back and read that, because that will definitely inspire a lot of your character choices and just make your gaming experience 2 or 3 times better. I mean, how can it not? So, all right, yeah, you need to know the world that you're adventuring in. 256 years ago. So the imperial calendar, the imperial Lorenthian calendar, is the present day is 571. Actually, I think in my campaign it's now 574, 575. So 4 years of. So the default starting present era is 571 IC, which means 571 imperial calendar. So on the imperial calendar, Aradorn was founded in the year 315 IC. So 256 years ago. and I'll read really quick the little blurb and the timeline. Aradorn is founded by in 256 years ago in 1 AA, Age of Aradorn. Aradorn is founded by Brithian explorers and nobles, and it would be loosely ruled by a confederation of thanes, dukes, and petty kings. At times of great need, however, a high king would be elected by the nobility and high priests of St. Paladir. To this day, only 3 kings, high kings, have been chosen, and then only for a handful of years. So the current high king is actually Gareth Silverhawk, who is the son of Gallimore Silverhawk, the second high king. And then the first high king was several generations before that. In fact, I'm not sure I even have his name. So that's a bit of lore. I don't think I've actually figured out. I think it's in some of my notes somewhere, but it's not published in the core rulebook or any of the other books. But I think I do. I'm pretty sure I have him in my notes somewhere. That was my cat. Made a really annoying meow. But she's lovely. Trying to get my attention. So there's currently a High King, Gareth Silverhawk. The cool thing is he's been High King ever since the Gorgon Wars. The Gorgon Wars ended, according to the timeline, the default start of the campaign was 9 years ago in 562 IC, Imperial Calendar. So 9 years ago, that was the big event of the Gorgon Wars. You know, even though it's not technically, well, actually Aradorn does something to do with it, so I will read it. So the little entry from the timeline is just a paragraph. 9 years ago, in 562 IC, another massive cataclysm strikes Earthworld, centered mainly again in the Sea of Pardonis region, but felt throughout most of the known world. Gorgonic creatures pour out of Golgotha, overrunning much of Lithalor and Ismondos, eventually cross the Bloodrock Mountains. The Laurentian Empire is said to be the last beacon of hope, but even most of its well-armed legions fall. Only through the intervention of the High King of Aradorn and his mighty cavalry are the Gorgons thrown back, and even then with great losses. So as you can see, Aradorn kind of came to the rescue. Now, Larentia did a lot to start with their professional legions, and then Aradorn kind of swooped in at the end, which is a shame because they almost kind of had a loose alliance and definitely some respect for each other. They kind of bonded in brotherhood there, throwing back the Gorgons. Gorgons are half man, half animal type creatures, and it's like its whole category in Savage Kingdoms. For those of you who don't know, things like minotaurs and medusas or medusae, and did I say manticores? Manticora, hydras, that sort of thing. Typically things from Greek myth to be meta, because there is no Greece in the setting, but there is the Prydonian Islands, Prydonian Isles, which is kind of I took inspiration from ancient Greece there, and ancient Sparta, and ancient Troy, that sort of thing. The Hellenist people. So anyway, so these Gorgons had broken out, and I haven't gone into great detail about the Gorgon Wars. I've had strangely enough, not a lot of people have asked, but I had a couple of people email going, so what's, there's not mention in the previous editions of the core rule books, and not the third one either, about the Gorgons, and I was going to add more about that, but I actually decided to leave that more open for game masters to interpret individually as they see fit. And I think there's enough. I think that paragraph, there's a little bit of lore later on the books kind of sprinkled in throughout, particularly when you go to the Gazetteer section about some of the Prydonian islands and city-states. Also the mention of Gorgothon, who is the supposed creator of the Gorgons way back in the day in the age of Rodon. And maybe I'll do a video on that one of these days as well, if there's any interest. So despite that little bit of lore, like I said, I think that's probably enough to go on. So suffice it to say, Gorgons kind of burst. There was a big attack of Gorgons around most of the known world in the western kind of Macedonia. If you were in the far north or far, you probably were never harried by Gorgons and probably never even heard of the thing. So it sounds like it was probably a massive continental gigantic thing in my head anyway, because again, I've left it kind of open. It wasn't quite to that big deal, but a big enough deal for scholars and lore masters to write that entry in the timeline. So yeah, so that's what happened there. Aradorn sort of came to the rescue. Okay, a couple other quick things about Aradorn, because I don't want these videos to run too long, but I also want them to be long enough to be interesting and not a complete waste of time. All right, so Aradorn. So Aradorn to meta it a little bit, or to put it into real-world terms, as a lot of people have noticed in my setting, in a lot of fantasy settings, I'm certainly not the first to do this. In fact, most settings are pretty similar in this regard, but a lot of them are based on real-world, ancient or Dark Ages or early medieval history. Aradorn is no exception. However, Aradorn is one of the ones that's a little more not as grounded in a real world. I mean, it is, but not quite as obvious as some of the others. And I'll explain why. So I based Aradorn on Anglo-Norman. So in other words, after the Norman invasion, when the early formations of knighthood, the Knights, people laugh about that in Monty Python, but the thing is, it actually was pronounced not exactly that way, but Knit was the Anglo was a Norman word. So after Anglo, the Anglo-Saxon term, which would have been something like Ritter or something like that. But so it's kind of based on that era. However, the next layer of it, which is probably even more telling in my opinion, is based on Arthurian. It's an Arthurian setting, but not an early Arthurian, which is actually what I prefer. The Cymric Welsh beginnings of the Mabinogion and that sort of stuff, were the first mentions of Gawain and Arthur and Merlin, and which we say Merlin now, sort of started. But as some of you know, who are really kind of in history, particularly medieval history, the Normans, again, sort of took over the myth, and I think my wife just sneaked in the background. She failed her stealth check. They sort of took over these cool myths. There she goes again. And made them their own. So the Arthurian myths became more almost like the movie Excalibur, although minus all the shiny full plate armor, which was kind of ridiculous. The rest of that movie was amazing, though, however, so check it out if you haven't, from 1982, I believe. Maybe 81. I think it was 82. Yeah, like right after Conan the Barbarian, I believe, was released. So, yeah, so Aradorn is based off of Anglo-Norman, Dark Age, well, really early Middle Ages, literally right at the early of what scholars would now call the medieval period, right after the Viking Age, and kind of high ideal Arthurianism. So, but not quite getting there. So if I had to put and I leave a lot of the cultures kind of deliberately open. I don't like to tie stuff too much to the real world, because then you open up all these other cans. So I think it's better just to loosely tie it. And the reason writers do that, and world builders, I think is probably fairly obvious, is so that you already have a template for what you want to play. Say if somebody wants to play an Aradorn and they know exactly what I just said, or they read it in the book, they know in their head that's like, okay, Anglo-Norman, I know a little bit about that. Might even say hybrid, early, what people would say early England, with a little touch of Arthurian idealism. So I think most people, unless you're like super young and haven't really studied that stuff yet, can attach themselves to that. So without really reading that much more, and hopefully people will, you have a template to kind of grasp. You sort of know the general deal with that culture and maybe how you would play that character from that culture, a character from that culture. So yeah, so that's loosely what Aradorn is based on, and you could probably tell the name. A lot of again, this is not unusual. Our authors do this all the time, without being too bangy over the heady. Hopefully, try to a name that kind of inspires that. And so to me, when I came with the name Aradorn, it was Aradorn. It seemed kind of it almost sounds like Aragorn, which is kind of a high ideal character from Middle Earth. But yet it's its own thing, and it sounds like it could be, it has an A in there for Arthurian, AR, so yeah, so that was the whole idea behind it. So, all right, so a little bit more about the Aradornians in general. So I'll just read the first paragraph of the Aradornian entry, page 22 in the hardcover book, 23 in the digital file. The men and women of Aradorn are known for their budding ideals of chivalry, for they are generally a horse people with a high understanding of knighthood, honor, and duty. Their realm is an expansive one, ruled traditionally by 3 kings or dukes, although a high king is occasionally elected in times of crisis. All right, well, just read the next paragraph, because it's not that long, actually. Saint Paladir is the primary, and in some ways only, deity of the realm, for often he is called the lone true god. It is said that he was once mortal and ascended into godhood nearly 300 years ago. So his faith is 300 years, yeah, pretty old, but it's not like that ancient. Even still, the old gods of the West are still referenced on occasion in the wilder border regions of Aradorn, although the truth keepers of St. Paladir do their best to keep those old deities down so that the belief in St. Paladir can thrive. So as you can see, it's not quite to the level of Catholicism in the real world that like made them more active to drive out the pagan religions. The truth keepers kind of do it, but they kind of let particularly the rural people sort of cling on to their old gods, almost like the way the Catholic Church did in Ireland, where they kind of married a lot of the Celtic Druidic symbologies and beliefs into the Christian dogma, which was quite clever, actually. St. Patrick was a pretty darn clever dude, I think, who helmed all of that up. Last paragraph. The typical Aradornian is tall and lean, often with sandy-colored hair and blue-green eyes. In real-world history, they resemble the Anglo-Normans with a solid dash of Arthurian high culture, as I mentioned earlier. More about Aradorn appears in Chapter 20, The Savage West, and Section 6, A Brief Gazetteer. So in that chapter of the book, you can read a lot more about Aradorn. So the racial entries I decided to make a little bit shorter for everyone, just to kind of give you a dash of what it's about. And then if you wanted deeper stuff, you go to the Gazetteer and read the actual kingdom entry. All right, so let's see, what are we at? 16 minutes, that's cool. So as far as starting attributes, Aradornians, here's a picture, piece of art. That's an Aradornian in chainmail. Or actually, mail is what it's technically called, but in fantasy we always say chainmail, which is fine. And a mail coif, and it looks like he has some plated shoulder pauldrons as well. So technically he's in plate and chain armor, which is about the highest level of armor there is in the setting, other than Dwargar plate. Just a nice little side note there, a little segue into a side note. The Aradornians they do produce a decent amount of plate and chain for knights and others who can actually afford it, who can scavenge for the kit. Maybe a very successful mercenary might be able to scavenge his kit together. I like using the word kit or harness for armor, in fact, instead of suit, because suits of armor, it's kind of a modern term, and it doesn't really fit that much in many styles of armor. You can get a suit of plate armor, sort of, if it's specially made for you. You might even get a suit of hard leather armor, although that's kind of weird. That's technically a harness also. But most warriors would have to have created a harness or kit of armor, meaning that they kind of scrounged for it. This is actually where the term brigandine comes from. Brigandine, because brigands often wore brigandine, and the reason brigands had it, because they started with like maybe some leather jerkin, and they would, over time, through their thefts and just wandering around, maybe even entering a market at some point in disguise, or maybe in an area they're not known, to purchase a few things, and they would augment their armor with like pieces like metal plates. And brigandine later became a thing where it was a coat of plates, where it was like thick fabric and there were plates inside of it. That is also a form of brigandine. But the way I'm using it, in a way some historians still use it, is that it is a commandeered sort of form of armor, where it's kind of leather, typically hard leather, or possibly very thick, soft leather or fur, with bits of rings or metal plates and stuff augmented on it, maybe even pieces of lamellar or something like that augment it. So in general, it basically explains augmented leather armor, really. So it's kind of a middle category between your leathers and your metal armors, which is your mail and your plate armor. So yeah, little side note there. So the Aradornians are definitely sort of known for that style of armor. Let's see, a couple little things about them. So their special ability as a player character, what are we at, 19 minutes? You say I'm stressing over this now. Is faith and piety. Aradornians get a +1 bonus to all resolve rolls due to their typically deep faith in the one lone god, St. Paladir, and his archangels. Important to note, a little side note there for St. Paladir, his religion consists of, there is a belief in angels, angelic creatures, which are a thing in Savage Kingdoms. But in a lot of cultures, they don't recognize angels, or they might even, especially in the East, they might even call them demons. A lot of times linguistically, it's the same word. Here in the West, I kind of took more of a sort of Judeo-Christian take on angels, a little bit more So they're a little more recognized as part of the dogma and faith of the St. Palladarian truth-keeping religion. There's only 3 archangels that their names are known. There's probably more, but there's only 3 commonly known. That is Galen. Galen is the sword angel. He's like he's like Michael in the Catholic faith. He's kind of the warrior angel, the guardian. Galen, in fact, he's even said to sometimes wield a flaming sword, a great flaming sword. And the other archangel that's known is Tristana, and she is or is it Tristwin? I think it's Tristwin. Tristwin or Tristana? One is the queen, is High King Gareth's queen's name. In any case, I'll look it up later, but something like that. That archangel, she is a archangel or archangel, some people say, but archangel of healing and motherhood, sort of, nurturing. And then the other third main and sort of only really known named archangel would be Caladwir. So Caladwir is and you might can tell by the name that it's from, I don't think it's directly from the Mabinogion, but it's definitely a Welsh Arthurian kind of word, and that was obviously on purpose. So Caladwir is a archangel of wisdom, so wisdom and insight. So yeah, so you cover your holy trinity of sort of main ideals for an Aradornian, particularly an Aradornian, say, knight or noble or something. All right, then you get to choose 3 skill specialties. I won't really go into that, but there's a whole list of so skill specialties are just things that culture kind of excels at. So you're almost expected to be good at healing arts, or curing disease or fresh wounds, or you're good with a great sword or a lance or a long sword. That's kind of an Aradornian warrior thing, a longbow or spear, or crafting, blacksmithing, or animal handling, horses for sure. Aradornians are known as kind of a horse people, particularly a Western horse people. And then there's the favorite talents. I'm not going to go into all of those, but it's just like any other racial entry. Favorite weaknesses. I'll go into those really quick. So their favorite weaknesses are gaius/taboo. So it's the same thing. The reason I called it both is because some people know the word gaius as well as taboo, which is kind of weird because gaius is more of a Celtic and Western word, but for some reason we don't know it as much as taboo. Oath-bound and obsession with chivalry, honor, or truth. Thin, too tall, or zealot of St. Palladir. Those are their favorite weaknesses. Obviously, you can have other weaknesses, but as you probably know, if you know the rules pretty well, that if you get a favorite weaknesses, you get a bonus point for it. So, starting languages, they start with Brithian. That's their native tongue. So, that reminds me, a nice little side note here. And this has caused confusion before, particularly with newer players. So, there is no Aradornian tongue. Brithian is the native tongue of Aradorn. Now, technically, there's an Aradornian dialect, just like there's American English and British English, as you would imagine, but it's still the same language. I mean, a speaker from Northumbria and a speaker from, say, North Carolina and the United States, we're going to understand each other 98% of the time. There's going to be some few local little terms thrown around but within context, you can pretty easily figure out what the person's talking about. So that's kind of how it is with Brithian. So the Brithians, as I mentioned in the little timeline blurb that I read, Aradornians were originally Brithians. So in other words, Brithia was an older kingdom that's in the northwest of the western continent of Astagonia. And so the land east, what is now Aradorn, was actually just it was wild tribes. There were humans that lived there, but they were they're pretty primitive. There were wild Sidhe that lived in the Bloodthorn, what's now called the Bloodthorn Forest. The Sidhe had their own name for it before, and their name was very similar because they actually they were guardians of the Bloodthorns, these sacred trees that many of them used to exist, and now there's only said to be maybe a dozen or so, perhaps a few more. So other than wild Sidhe, there were just a few human tribes that kind of lived in the area, and one of them, the most notable human tribe, was the Aradorni. Not to be confused with the Aradornians, what would be later become known as the Aradornians. So when the Brithians forged east to conquer those lands, and conquer them they did with mostly sword and fire, but they did, most of the time, they did seek diplomatic means. And one of these tribes, most of the tribes either scattered or were just threw themselves in battle against the Aradornians or the Brithians at the time and were conquered. But the Aradorni not only were brave, but also were brave enough to sort of negotiate with Aradorn. They didn't really show as much fear. In fact, really not much at all. And so the Aradorni, and yes, some were captured and taken as slaves or whatever, but many of them kind of integrated, like almost willingly, into the new culture of the Brithians coming east. And so, out of respect of the Aradorni, the first kings of Aradorn, or what would be called Aradorn, named the realm Aradorn. So, nice little history lesson on why it's called Aradorn. So that is why there's still Brithian speakers. Like I said, there's a dialect. After 256 years, there would be some dialectual differences, particularly in Eastern Aradorn or along the border along Larenthia. But in general, yeah, it's the same language. So, yeah, little side note there. All right, so sample names. So here's sample names. I won't go too much longer with the video, but just to let you guys know. So their names are very, as you would imagine. I did a mix of Anglo-Saxon names. Some Anglo-Saxon names are really cool. There's some that are weird, but some are really cool, and I'm surprised we don't even use them anymore. And then some kind of like more almost obvious Arthurian names. For example, here's some male names: Aelred, Aramor, Giggelin, the Archangel; Gareth, the High King; Peredur, from Arthurian fame; Tristan, also from Arthurian fame; and Willem. Willem's a good kind of good old Anglo-Saxon name that's kind of very common. It would be the common of really like William today, probably even more common, maybe almost like John. Those are male. So here's some female sample names: Elrith, Eredwin, Elspeth, Ingvid, Giggelina, the female version of Galen; Morgana; and Tristana, the female version of Tristan. So those are kind of cool, I think. I like those names. Aradornians generally use son of naming schemes, though proper surnames are often used for noble houses. So in other words, most Aradornians are Elred, son of Gareth, or Aramor, son of Tristan, or Willem, that kind of thing, or Elspeth, daughter of Ingvid, or typically it's daughter of the father. Not always. If the father dies or maybe his esteem gets lost, then you might be daughter of the mother. So yeah. But noble houses might have, for example, the royal house of the High King is Silverhawk. So he flies the Silverhawk on his banner, and that's just became the name of his house. In fact, his banner, his heraldic device came first. He would just kind of be known as this Silverhawk banner, and legend has it he actually had a fairy-touched hawk as a companion early on, and it had silvery eyes and a silvery sheen to its feathers, and supposedly that's where he started flying the banner of Silverhawk, or even on a shield, and then eventually he just named, when he became High King, he just named the royal house Silverhawk. So there you go. Cultural items, and then Aradornians get to start with one of the following cultural items, which I won't go into, but there's a couple that stand out. Bloodthorn Blossom, which is cool because I mentioned it, grows in the Bloodthorn Forest. My video is suddenly getting kind of sketchy, so hopefully this comes out well. Like it's not, like the frames per second suddenly kind of weird. Maybe an internet issue, probably. Anyway, out here in the mountains, so you never know. Silver-plated rose and sword, symbol of St. Paladir, is an option to start with. Signet ring, some other stuff. Mastercrafted riding saddle. Possibly you can start with a bastard sword, which is often in Aradornian parlance called a saddle sword, because it's typically worn along your saddle. Because, we're talking about a 5.5 foot long sword. All right, and their general code of honor, this is probably the last thing, since we're at 29 minutes. General code of honor of Aradornians is respect and honor all nobles, knights, and in particular the High King. Number 2 in the code of honor, general code of honor. Respect and honor all priests, monks, and holy warriors in service of St. Paladir. Number 3, respect and honor all women, especially noble women, for they are the flower of chivalry. So, nice little side note, what we would call chivalry, or what the High Middle Ages would have referred to as chivalry, is starting to come into Aradorn. But remember, I always have to remind people of this. This is a kind of a gritty, Dark Ages, sword and sorcery type setting. So if you're thinking, glittering, shining Playtime parades with flowers and that sort of thing, you're probably not quite in the right area. So bring it back. I think a good recent example would be Game of Thrones. The jousting that you see in Game of Thrones and the tournaments. They're kind of fanfare, but they're also they're very brutal. They're very gritty. So think of it like that with chivalry. It's kind of an early form of chivalry. They're just trying to figure it out. Number 4, right any obvious wrongs being done, even if it is only to report it to a higher authority. Number 5, be brave, forthright, loyal, and dutiful. Obey superiors unless they prove dishonorable. Number 6, the last one, seek justice in serious insults by single combat or by acceptance of public apology. So, so in modern terms, it's like, sorry, man, okay, sorry. It wouldn't be that. Public apology is a big thing. Remember, this is an era where your renown, your reputation's everything, because there is no internet, there is no license checks, there isn't a computer that has all the data of whether you're a criminal or not. There might be people have written some of the stuff down, but mostly it's all in the head. It's all assumed. It's all verbal. That's why oaths are so important. So a public apology is a big deal. It means, like, in front of a bunch of people, person's like obviously apologizing, perhaps even offering an apology gift. Otherwise, it's single combat. This gets overlooked a lot. Sometimes I have NPCs deliberately insult some of the PCs just to see what they do, and rarely do they challenge the person in single combat. And maybe that's a good thing, because often they do try to seek some other thing. But sometimes, like, the catty back and forth insults is like, that's just not they would just, like, a brave warrior might, like, do an insult, one or two, and then he'd be like, all right, we're done with that. Are we throwing down, or are you gonna make amends for the insult you just gave? So that's kind of pretty much any honor-based culture. I mean, you can think feudal Japan as well, and in addition to just about all the ancient European cultures, particularly in the north and west of Europe. They're honor-based, warrior-based cultures. So people have a good bit of pride for things that they've done in their lives, and some little person insulting them is like, yeah, it's like, at first it might be like, really, and then it's like, all right, you keep it up. Let's see what you got. See if you can back up what you can speak. If we can only do this to lots of people on the internet nowadays, right? Anyway, side note. And on that note, I think that's about it, because we're at 32 minutes. I only wanted this to be maybe 30, so that's a little over, but not by much. So that is the first installment about Aradorn. I hope this video comes out right, because it's acting really weird right now. But thanks for following along. The next one will probably be, I'll just continue in alphabetical order, so the next one will be about Brithia. So thanks, and next time you play an Aradornian, maybe some of this stuff will be cool. All right, talk to you guys later. Bye.